from the brutal capitalist dictatorship of Kuala Lumpur. I hope you're having an amazing day, because if you're having an amazing day, I'm having an amazing day. And if I'm having an amazing day, you should be having an amazing day. Now, you've probably heard of the debate bro genre on YouTube. In a nutshell, the debate bro genre is one which involves a bunch of people who get together on live streams in order to debate each other on a variety of socio-political topics, right? And basically the idea is that the man with the strongest ideas will win, supposedly. But as someone who has served as an adjudicator on debate teams, because I myself, as you're probably aware, those of you who have followed my channel for a fair amount of time, I was a school teacher in a private school until I went freelance. But I will join the school system again after the teachers have seized the means of production. But anyway, that's beside the point. As a school teacher, I used to organize formal school debates, and I can tell you that the debate bro culture should not be taken seriously. Basically, it should not be taken seriously as a formal debate, a formal exchange of ideas, right? Some very famous debate bros might include people like Hassan, or Vosh, or Infrared Haas, or Jackson Hinkle, or perhaps Drew Pavlo, right? And basically, what you see on these debates is basically, at first, what is supposed to start out as a formal exchange of ideas very soon devolves into mudslinging, basically, of each man throwing all kinds of ad hominem at each other, at the other, sorry. Basically, it basically goes from being an exchange of ideas to being like a WWF performance, basically. It's like watching a wrestling match, you know. And I'll be honest, I sometimes do watch these debates for the dramatic effect, because I do find them entertaining, and I'm sure many of you do. And, you know, there's something quite almost endearing, actually, about watching two grown men hurling playground bully insults at each other, basically trying to outman the other man, which is part and parcel of the capitalist, rugged, individualist American culture, right? Outmanning the other man, basically. So what starts out as an exchange of ideas ends up being a battle between two men trying to outman each other. Yes, in these heated discussions, it's really not uncommon for people to get very, very personal, right? And start attacking one another with very, very personal insults, right? And more than anything, these personal attacks really reveal the debater's state of mind, right? Rather than it does anything about their opponent, right? I'll explain what I mean by that, right? Now, you know how people tend to tell you the truth when they get angry, right? When I've always said that if you want to know somebody's real opinions or somebody's real personality, make them angry enough, trigger them enough, and they will tell you exactly who they are. They will express who they really are, right? It's easy for people to wear a mask when they're not being provoked and their buttons aren't being pushed. So I was watching the Jackson Hinkle versus Drew Pavlo debate. Quite frankly, it was a debate which neither of whose participants I felt strongly compelled to support, you know, because I don't feel like giving critical support to either Hinkle or Pavlo, right? But that's another, I'll explain my reasons in another video. Anyway, I was watching it just for the the amusement factor, you know. And yes, while Pavlo does say some rather cringy things from time to time, I have to say that, yes, ultimately it was Hinkle, I think, who was the more reprehensible individual in this case. Because it was very telling when Hinkle got really angry and started berating Drew Pavlo. There are a million things that you could berate him for, but what I found really curious is that Hinkle was berating Pavlo for living with his parents at 24, which reveals quite a lot about Hinkle's attitudes towards culture. Take a look.
I'm 24 years old. I graduated with I graduated high school with brilliant marks. I was in the top 5% of the graduating cohort in Queensland, and I have almost finished my university. I have almost perfect grade 7-point average, so which is high distinction. So I've been invited to speak at Oxford University. So I'm very, very proud of my education background.
All right. I just got to undo the screen change that I did for you there. All right. I got your face back in there. All right, let's continue on with our super chats. So, Goran, $20.
Wait, no one wanted to ask me where my college experience was?
I mean, if you want to expose, I mean, it's not really related, and we should try to keep it quick. But for sure, if you want to give us 15 seconds and describe, are you over 18 and did you attend a higher education? Sure, if you want to answer that, you go for it.
Yeah, I'll answer that. So I was not indoctrinated at a liberal propaganda university like Drew Pavlo. And I did not subject myself to Nazi Hitlerite propaganda. I did not go to college. I'm a self-made man. I'm not living and haven't lived at my parents' house since I was 17, unlike Drew, who's still at his parents' house. And Drew, did you just make sure your mom's doing okay? Okay, so I'm a self-made man. I'm very proud of that.
Now, first of all, I have to make it very clear that I'm not defending Drew Pavlo, yeah? Pavlo is no angel, and the fact that he openly celebrated the death of Daria Dugina, you know, the Russian philosopher's daughter with very right-wing views, right? He said that she deserved to get blown up because she was a fascist who was basically promoting extremist views against Ukrainians. Now, regardless of whether she was or wasn't, you know, still, I think that to advocate the death of a civilian just because that person holds reprehensible views, it's still reprehensible in itself. And I think we leftists do need to be careful. It's one aspect in our camp that we need to critically examine. The idea that some of us have gotten too comfortable with violence being enacted on fascists, right? I mean, at one point, they were even going around punching up Nazis in America, right? I mean, do Nazis, do fascists deserve to get punched up? Who am I to say, right? I mean, well, it depends whether they're actually doing, or rather they're actually taking an active role in persecuting people, right? Now, yeah, but as far as I'm concerned, Dugin's daughter was a writer, so she was basically no different from someone like Ben Shapiro or Jordan Peterson. Anyway, today I'm not talking about Pavlo. The fact is that Hinkle, the fact that there are a million things to roast Pavlo about, but the fact that Hinkle had to berate him for living with his parents is it shines a light really on Hinkle's attitude towards non-Western cultures. Because the thing is that these right-wing MAGA communists in America are always going on about how the 白左 or the white left don't respect other cultures, because they say things, for example, like, don't try to promote your LGBT degeneracy in places where they're not wanted. respect the sovereignty of other countries and respect cultural norms of other countries, mister. That's what they constantly say, right? And apparently, the white left or the Western left doesn't respect non-Western cultural norms. But they, the LaRoucheite right-wing Pat Sock gang, are apparently respectful towards social norms in non-Western countries. But as you can see, the fact that Hinkle would demonstrate such immense cultural insensitivity, right, towards a Mediterranean person in whose culture it is, like us Asians, it is perfectly acceptable to live with your parents until you're married and sometimes beyond, proves to you that these people like Hinkle are basically hypocrites. Yes, they are selective when it comes to respecting non-Western cultures. For example, if a non-Western culture has got aspects, I will say that all these right-wingers in America and the Anglo world who say that they respect non-Western cultures, I will say that they are selective about their respect, right? If a non-Western culture practices something that they like, for example, it has got extremely austere policies towards women or LGBT people, they will of course say that you should respect that element of the culture, right? Like, for example, you had people in the alt-right saying things like, I don't like them brown Muslims, but I love the way they handle females, right? Yeah, you can actually go and look at certain MGTOW, men going their own way forums. You'll find some of them have even praised those far right-wing Islamic regimes as having basically found the hack for hypergamy, right, in controlling women's hypergamy. But that's beside the point. You see, the onus is not on Pavlo to prove that he's not a Western chauvinist, because Pavlo is not the one telling people to respect other people's cultural norms, right? The onus is on people like Jackson Hinkle to put their money where their mouth is and prove that they themselves are not Western chauvinists. But as you can see, judging by the fact that he berated Pavlo for practicing a perfectly acceptable cultural practice in a Mediterranean culture and an Asian culture, shows you just how much respect Hinkle has towards non-Anglo, non-capitalist, non-rugged individualist cultures, right? Hinkle has a bunch of rather questionable characters whom he calls friends, right? Like, I never called Drew Pavlo my friend, and yet people like, all of these tankies in America were all going ape shit because I decided to have a conversation with him. I never put my arm around his shoulder and called him my buddy, right? But Hinkle, on the other hand, is not only, buddies with Jordan Peterson, who apparently shares his ambition of stamping down the globalists, whatever the globalists means. Hinkle is also friends, by his own admission, with Gonzalo Lira, the infamous Coach Red Pill. And if you don't know the channel Coach Red Pill, oh, I bless your soul for your innocence, if you're not familiar with that horrid manosphere channel, basically. It's really a toxic, vile cesspit of misogyny. And it doesn't just stop at misogyny, yeah? Coach Red Pill is no friend of the global south, right? Yes, you can watch his videos if you want to, Coach Red Pill is basically no different from someone like Sapenza, basically. You watch his movie, American Women Are Garbage. Go ahead and watch that. And you will see fundamentally that he advises the incels in his audience to geomax to Asia and Eastern Europe in order to take advantage of their position as Western men, right? In fact, he's actually openly said that the women in those countries will find you more interesting than the local guys. You can watch his videos for all I care, right? These are the kinds of people that Hinkle calls his friends. So I find it very bizarre that, you know, there are Asian American men even who actually follow Coach Red Pill, basically, who's like, who is no different from Sapenza. And basically the fact that, you know, you are only as good as the company that you keep. And Jackson Hinkle happens to be good friends with Coach Red Pill. So what does that tell you? You see, I would never, for example, call someone like Hillary Clinton my friend. I would never call someone like Henry Kissinger my friend. And if I were to call someone like Henry Kissinger my friend, you could not be blamed for basically thinking that I was a horrible person for sharing the values with this person, right? For being friends with a horrible person. But basically, yeah, what you see, what you're seeing, this rise of MAGA communism, or, you know, this rise of Donald Trump communism, or the idea that people like Trump, Hinkle, and so on are anti-establishment. It's all a crock of shit, right? What you're seeing, the rise of people like Jackson Hinkle, Donald Trump, etc., right? These people demonstrate the very same parochial American attitudes towards other cultures. They demonstrate the same contempt towards non-Western, non-Anglo-Saxon cultures. And they demonstrate the same toxic, rugged individualism as any establishment right-winger like Milton Friedman or Thomas Sowell or Margaret Thatcher. But the only difference is that these subversive right, these anti-establishment right-wingers, so-called anti-establishment right-wingers, the only difference between them and the real establishment right-wingers like Thomas Sowell is that the establishment right-wingers got in, while these people were not, well, they were not good enough to get in. And so they call themselves anti-establishment. But make no mistake, their value system is just as parochial or just as chauvinistic as any rugged individualist America First right-winger. You think I'm exaggerating? Take a look at some of Hinkle's tweets. I mean, you can look at a variety of Hinkle's tweets, from whitewashing the legacy of American colonialism to openly celebrating Manifest Destiny and describing anime as a pedophile's hobby, which is basically the equivalent, the 21st century equivalent of how these right-wingers in the 1950s were going on about how rock and roll is satanic, rock and roll is the work of the devil. Yeah, basically, you know, showing intense disrespect and ignorance for this unique Japanese cultural export, right? The fact of the matter is that Hinkle's tweets are just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, we can talk about him meeting up with Tucker Carlson and appearing on Tucker Carlson's show. But the fact of the matter is that, you know, it's interesting to note that that Hinkle was once a liberal. Yeah. And that's why I don't like liberals, to tell you the truth. I mean, I'm a leftist, not a liberal, you know. But basically, you know, Hinkle was actually once a Bernie bro, right? A few years ago, before he switched camp, when he found that Bernie Sanders was not winning, basically, then he switched camp, right? So the fact is that, you know, people often say that there's when you scratch a liberal, a fascist bleeds, right? Well, there does seem to be a certain liberal to fascist pipeline. Because, you know, if you give this Hinkle any bit of political power, if he does get into politics and the American Republicans do accept him as one of them, right? And he will go full-blown American exceptionalist, right? He will go full-on Western chauvinist. The fact that he and his supporters couldn't even respect the Mediterranean culture of the multi-generational family unit tells you how much respect these so-called subversive writers, these so-called third worldist tankies do have towards non-Western cultures and non-Western people. Yes, they talk a good game about how, you know, the leftists, the Baizor, need to respect other cultures. But you scratch the surface of these American tankies and very soon you will find that they're just as chauvinistic and just as disgusted by non-Western cultures and non-rugged individualist ways of life, like living with your parents until you're married. They're just as disgusted by that as any Western liberal, right? So I'm not here to defend Western liberals or Western leftists, what have you. I mean, you know, I don't like people like Bill Maher or Sam Harris, but at the same time, these right-wing tankies like Hinkle are all a bunch of posers. They only pose as being, you know, they only put on this act of, you know, of virtue signaling about how much they respect non-Western cultures, as long as they only respect the aspects of certain non-Western cultures, like homophobia in places like Iran or places like Pakistan, which they think is a good thing, but the aspects which don't line up with their rugged individualist toxic mentality, such as, you know, generations living under the same roof as that Greek man Drew Pavlo does, well, very soon you will see their true colors. You will basically see their true American or Anglo-chauvinist culture, colors, basically. And you'll realize that they have no more respect towards non-Western ways of life than basically any other Baizor, basically. Okay, I'm not stereotyping the Baizor. I'm sure there are Baizor who do respect non-Western ways of life. But as I was saying, the subversive right are not the friends of the masses, and they are certainly not the friends of the socialists or the friends of the working class. No. The subversive right are only butthurt because they did not get into the upper echelons of the right wing in places like America or Canada. You could say Jordan Peterson is also one of the subversive right? So people see them, people like Trump, Hinkle, Peterson, people see them as anti-establishment because they dress themselves up as anti-establishment figures, right? They present themselves as being these heroes who are standing up against the conservative establishment, and trying to enforce real conservatism, right? Real right-wing traditional values. But don't be fooled. Their value system fundamentally is still capitalist. Their value system is still rugged individualism. Their value system is still basically Western chauvinism, right? And the moment they get any political power and become established in the upper echelons of the conservative parties in whatever country they are in, well, these fellas will drop the Anti-Imperialism Act. They will drop the whatever you want to call it, right? They will drop the so-called virtue, the virtue signaling about respecting non-Western cultures. And they will be just as chauvinistic and just as high-handed as any other establishment Republican, right? When they get what they want, their true colors will show. Does that make sense, right? So I think it's very foolish for people like Eddie Liger, you know, the Midwestern Marx, to be trying to be friends with these MAGA communists. I think it's a very foolish thing to do. I'm not saying that every single person who voted for Donald Trump is a horrible Nazi fascist. But what I am saying is that the leaders of the MAGA movement, people like Trump or Hinkle, these people, ultimately do not want a revolution. You see, the fact that they're trying to divide the workers by saying that baristas are not real workers, right? But they don't, things like they do stuff like that. Why do they do that? Because they don't want a revolution. They want a career, right? And of course, you know how socialism appeals to the younger generation. Well, they put on the aesthetics of progressivism, basically, by calling themselves socialists. But fundamentally, these people practice the same toxic individualism and the same toxic attitude towards the same toxic, rugged individualism, basically, and as any right-winger, and the same disdain towards poor people. You can see it. They of course, while we shouldn't be romanticizing poverty, it seems that these people fetishize wealth and status a little bit too much to be calling themselves socialists. They don't seem to take very, very kindly to poor people either. Remember, Gonzalo Lira is a Pinochet supporter, right? Gonzalo Lira is famous for swooning over the Chilean fascist Pinochet, right? And basically, Thomas Sowell, Milton Friedman's best disciple, was once a Marxist, in inverted commas, until he gained some proximity to capital and political power, and that was when he shed his sheepskin and exposed himself for the wolf he really was. That is the path every single subversive right-winger is going to end up taking, right? You don't believe me? Watch people like Hinkle, watch them and see just how their true colors show when they start getting political power, right? Very soon, you're going to find that people like Jackson Hinkle are really no different from your garden variety American chauvinist Republican. But it will only be a matter of time before that happens. Before I end this video, I just want to say that, yes, I'm going to humor Hinkle by saying, save Drew's dog from whatever Drew wants to do to the dog. Although, I don't know what kind of things Jackson Hinkle's wild imagination has conjured up. And the thing is, though, these third worldist right-wing tankies do not genuinely care about the people of the global south that they profess to be helping, right? Because I myself call them out. When I call them and their leaders out, I, an Asian person from the global south, gets called whitewashed, traitor, etc., etc. They seem to be laboring under the delusion that everyone in the global south is a monolith and everyone in the global south shares their view. For example, I have seen these tankies, these infrared gang saying things like, oh, everyone in China agrees with me. Bitch, China is a country that contains billions of people, right? The global south has billions of people, and certainly not everyone is going to share your view. Believe it or not, even among the Chinese in Malaysia, I'm a Chinese in Malaysia, not everybody supports the CCP, okay? There are a variety of opinions, right? Some people support the Chinese government. Some people are sympathetic to the Chinese government because they believe that a strong China will, of course, ensure the security of the Chinese people in Southeast Asia, which I think is a very, very foolish pipe dream to bank on, because, you know, China does not consider us to be part of the Chinese family, right? We are good neighbors, we are friends, but not immediate family, right? So it's a very foolish thing to bank on for both Chinese diaspora in Southeast Asia as well as Chinese diaspora in America or Europe, right? It's a very foolish thing to do, to basically say that my allegiance is with China, basically. That's a foolish thing to do. Some people among the Chinese-speaking community in Malaysia, I'm not one of the Chinese-speaking community, but I have friends from the Chinese-speaking community do not like China at all. They speak perfect Mandarin or perfect Cantonese or perfect Hakka, and they do not like China one single bit. Okay? So you can't lump in every single person with your views, or basically you can't go around calling anyone who doesn't support the Chinese Communist Party as an anti-Asian Nazi, as I've seen some of these tankies do, which is an extremely patronizing and chauvinistic way of looking at the world, assuming that every single person in the global south agrees with you, right? That every single Asian person in Asia shares your view. That is extremely patronizing, and it's also a form of Western chauvinism that I've seen demonstrated by these tankies. Because in the Chinese community in Malaysia itself, there are a multitude of opinions, right, on the issue of China, and not every Chinese person supports China or has got some imagined connection, some emotional connection with the ancestral land. To many of us Malaysian Chinese, China is about as foreign as a place like India or Zimbabwe or France, right? Malaysia is our homeland, so don't go projecting your own bias towards China as being like, oh, something that is the duty of every Asian person. Because I can tell you that, you know, that I have seen on Twitter tankies in America calling people who call out or who attack the CCP as anti-Asian Nazis. By that logic, many Asians in Asia are also anti-Asian Nazis because they don't like the Chinese government, right? So you don't even need to be a Sapenza supporter to dislike the Chinese government. There are many people who wouldn't like Sapenza because of his attacks on Chinese culture and Chinese cultural norms, who at the same time don't like the Chinese government as well, you know? People in Asia are not this monolith, they're not this homogeneous monolith that these tankies in America seem to have formed in their heads, right? And basically, yeah, we don't need Westerners speaking for us, right? Because Westerners who do not live here, who try to speak for us, will sometimes arrive at damaging conclusions, like how tankies like Brian Berlitic even arrive at the conclusion that the Bersih was a color revolution, right? The Bersih movement, you know, when Malaysians like myself, my family, and many Malaysians were angry at the government's unfair race-based politics, its unfair hoarding of wealth, we marched in yellow shirts. You had these American tankies labeling it labeling it a color revolution that was meant to destabilize Southeast Asia, right? So fundamentally, these people not only demonstrate an extremely chauvinistic attitude, this belief that the Westerner knows best, and a condescending attitude that an Asian person in Asia who does not fit their narrative or does not share their geopolitical view is ignorant or is simply a traitor to Asia. Besides having that extremely chauvinistic take, it seems that these people do not really care fundamentally about the people in the global south, right? Like, I've been on the extreme I've been on an extreme, I've been on the receiving end of an extreme hate campaign by Asian American tankies who live in America. Yeah, and basically because calling me whitewash because I don't fit their narrative on what a real Asian person is supposed to be or what a real Asian person is supposed to support, right? And basically, these people fundamentally do not care about people in the global south, because if they did care, they wouldn't be calling LGBT rights. People like us fighting for LGBT rights in the global south get called Western chauvinists by people like these tankies, right? People like Haas, for example. We get called liberal subverts, we get called Western chauvinists, whatever. But fundamentally, if you did care about the people in the global south, you would also care about the LGBT community, basically, who are suffering under the boot heel of repressive governments. Repressive, homophobic governments, many of which are the descendants or the successors to the colonial governments which were in place before this, right? So basically, the fact that these tankies are disingenuous can very easily be shown by how they call LGBT rights in the global south as Western imperialism, right? They will be friends with Western chauvinists like Jordan Peterson or Tucker Carlson or people like that. But they have the cheek at the same time to actually call people fighting for their basic dignity, to live as an LGBT person with basic dignity. They call that Western chauvinism. Fundamentally, these right-wing tankies in America are no different from the bourgeois that they criticize, right? They say the bourgeois are Western chauvinists. They say the bourgeois treats the global south as a monolith. They too are Western chauvinists. As you can see, as I've shown you today, Hinkle is a Western chauvinist. They too treat the global south as if it were a monolith where everyone agrees with them, right? But the fact is that people in the global south do not need Westerners to serve as our champions, right? I mean, I'm happy for you guys to sympathize with my cause, right? Achieving socialism in the global south. That's a noble thing to sympathize with us. And I'm happy to collaborate with you guys. But I'm not comfortable with what I'm seeing. Some of these people in Western countries claiming to be the true champions of the global south, the true voice of the global south. And basically anyone who questions or opposes them is basically somebody who's anti-Asian or anti-African or anti-Middle Eastern. There's no room for questioning, basically. And basically these people have a very, very right-wing Judeo-Christian and Islamic agenda, basically. They only seem to like elements, certain aspects of the global south. I should say certain reactionary aspects of the global south, like for example, the austere policies towards homosexuals, for example. They seem to like that, but but when it comes to other aspects of the global south, like the multi-generational family unit, you can see that they're just as chauvinistic and just as bigoted as any other typical garden variety Republican, right? But more importantly, what I want to say is that we don't need Westerners taking up, or rather Westerners appointing themselves as our champions, right? We're happy for you to sympathize with our cause. I mean, we socialists in the global south, but basically I'm not comfortable with people in Western countries, right-wing conservative people in Western countries, speaking on behalf of the global south, as if people in the global south were just like them, right? Because people in Asia and people in Africa are diverse, and not everyone is a ruthless reactionary, right? And yet at the same time, I'm not comfortable with these people saying that we are champions of the global south. And yet at the same time, their idea of championing the global south basically means, you know, preventing the spread of Western degeneracy in the global south. In their point of view, Western degeneracy, right? To keep the global south culturally right-wing. Because apparently Asia is supposed to be a very, very conservative place that doesn't take kindly to LGBT people, although these people are basically projecting their own right-wing fantasies of Asia and Africa, right? And basically whatever aspects of our cultures that they don't like, you can see clearly as day just how contemptuous they are towards it, right? They basically have an Orientalist fantasy of the global south as being this perfect place for conservative people like them. Conservative, right-wing, Christo-fascists like themselves, you know. And if they were to come here and see that that many people in Asia do not share their bigoted views, in fact, well, they wouldn't like it very much, actually. And the fact is that, yeah, even the Asian Americans in the tanky movement do not share anything culturally with us, right? The right-wing Asian Americans in the tanky movement, like these manosphere types, like Douglas Kim, for example, they have nothing in common with us beyond a genetic code. Because culturally, they are as American as Jackson Hinkle, right? And they basically have no right to speak on behalf of Asians in Asia, because that would be like me speaking on behalf of someone from an Aboriginal Australian tribe, and I'm not Aboriginal Australian, right? I did a semester of Aboriginal studies in uni, but that doesn't make me Aboriginal Australian. So the right-wing Republican Asian Americans like Kenny Xu or Douglas Kim or Kang Min Lee, fundamentally these guys are about as culturally Asian as I am culturally Aboriginal. So yeah, but the fact is that these tankies will try to speak on behalf of Asians in Asia, and they will call me a whitewash cuck because I don't share their reactionary social views, which they got from other right-wing Americans, right? Not from Asia, mind you, from other right-wing Americans. Okay then, well, that's about it for today. Take care, everyone, and have a nice day. It's really hot today, so make sure you drink plenty of water if you're in Malaysia. It's blazing hot. So take care. Ta-ta.